Good evening, folks. Thanks very much for coming in. You're all very welcome, and we hope everybody's safe and well. So, welcome to a very unique and special live tonight from Paranormal and History. Tonight, we are covering what we're calling Forgotten Pendle. And we're very privileged and very honoured to have some very special guests with us tonight. Starting with best-selling author Karen Perkins. And we've got acclaimed tour guide, Mr. Simon Entwistle, and we also have with us the creator and the author of the Pendle Witch blog, Mr. Thomas Ford. So thanks very much for coming in, everybody. And as you see the lady in the middle of us, you'll be seeing her a lot more often from now on. Her name is Jo. She's also a Pendle tour guide, but we're also very, very happy to announce that she is the team leader of our new English team that we just launched last week. So because Pendle is down in England, I thought we'll let Jo do this one, and she's a lot more knowledgeable. So Karen, Thomas and Simon, thanks very much for coming in. Thomas, it's a pleasure. Thomas has disappeared, but he will be back. It's always a pleasure to have you in, Karen and Simon. So with that, I'll just say hello to everybody in the chat. Sarah's here, Sam's here, Shelley, Sean, Lee, and Andy Murphy. So thanks very much for coming in. Maz is here as well. Thanks very much for coming in, everybody. Heather, we're starting to fill up quite rapid. So hi to everybody in the chat, and I'm going to hand you over to Jo for our Forgotten Pendle. Thank you.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. Now, quite rightly, as Scott has just said, I thought I was quite clued up with Pendle until I come across these three amazing people. All amazing, quite rightly, in their own right. Simon, Top Hat Tours, amazing. If you haven't been on one of Simon's tours, you really must, really, really must. Karen's books, on a cold evening or sitting, lounging by the pool, summer holiday, keeping our fingers crossed. We all know that we want one. You've got to, there's something for everyone. And they're gripping. Don't just buy one because it won't be enough. And we also have Thomas, the Pendle Witch blog. I personally call him my oracle of factual Pendle knowledge, because pretty much if you need to know it, he can back it with a fact. And if he can't, he quite rightly says he can't. And I've never met a fact that he hasn't been able to back yet. So my plan for this evening is I would like the three of you to tell us a little bit about your story of Pendle and why you are so drawn, attracted, captivated even with the whole story. I have my story, but I would like to hear yours. So Simon, if that's okay, are you all right to take us all the way back to 1612 and the horror or the innocence or the guiltiness of what actually happened in those little hamlets of Pendle Hill?
Well, we'll turn the clock back to the year 1603, and at that period of time we just lost Queen Elizabeth I, and she was replaced by King James VI of Scotland, then became King James I of England. And this man was absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. He not only believed that witches existed, he believed that witches were out to get him. And on becoming King of England, he wrote a book called the Demonology Book. And you can buy the Demonology Book today from any leading bookshop as you pick it up. How to try a witch, how to find a witch, and most importantly, how to eradicate a witch. He blamed witchcraft on the fact his wife Anne of Denmark couldn't get from Denmark to Scotland to marry him. And he also blamed witchcraft on the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. And he associated Catholicism with witchcraft. Now, the area we now call the Forest of Pendle was very, very isolated. It was away from civilization. But living in the Forest of Pendle in 1612 were a group of people that were going to go down in history as the Pendle Witches. The only window we have in their story is a book written by a gentleman called Thomas Potts. And Thomas Potts was the clerk to the courts at Lancaster City Castle for the trials. We have to rely on that book being honest and truthful because it's the only eyewitness account we have. What we do know is when he wrote that book, he was probably under a lot of duress because he certainly couldn't take on the King of England. And we do know that trials at Lancaster, the jury just consisted of men. In those days, women weren't allowed to have a brain, and it was believed by some men that women didn't even have a brain. And when it came to male chauvinism, women suffered terribly. So we have to rely on this book being honest and truthful. So let's turn the clock back to the 18th of March, 1612, and we're going to go to a little cottage deep in the centre of the Forest of Pendle called Malkin Tower. And living in Malkin Tower was a very, very elderly lady called Elizabeth Southern. She had lost her husband, but she did have a daughter called Elizabeth Devise, who lived with her, and she had 3 children, James, Alison, and Jeanette Devise. Living nearby in the village of Newchurch in Pendle was another very, very elderly lady, a lady called Anne Whittle, and she had a daughter called Anne Redfern. These were the main Pendle witches, but many, many more names will come into our story. It's said that Elizabeth Southern and Anne Whittle disliked each other intensely. Both women were over 85. They defied the laws of nature because life expectancy, if you were lucky, would be 35. These 2 women were over 85. Some historians believe that they lived for such a long period of time because they knew about local plants and herbs, etc. And of course, all modern medicines do indeed come from plants. But on the 18th of March, 1612, Alison Devise, Elizabeth Southern's granddaughter, had a walk from Malkin Tower along the foothills of Pendle towards the town of Colne, where she had the misfortune of meeting a local peddler called John Law. When I say peddler, John Law was basically a walking salesman, large pack in his back full of 1612 luxuries. And he would go from village to village selling his wares. He was also a bit like a walking newspaper, really, giving information from each village to the next. He would go to Roughly, he would go to Barley, he would go to Blacko, he would go to Colne, he would go to Downham, and he'd go to Newchurch in Pendle. He met young Alison Devise at the far end of Pendle, very near the town of Colne, and Alison begged of him, "Oh, please, sir, you can spare a few pins to pin me clothing together, sir. Just a few pins, sir. You can spare 1 or 2 pins. Get away with you. I'm not taking me pack off for you, lass. You got no money. You're no use to me. Please, sir, few pins, sir." According to John Law, the Halifax peddler, out of the forest pathway appeared a huge black dog with snarling white teeth and glowing red eyes, and the dog sat next to Alison. The dog turned to look at her, and the dog talked. "Alison, I can lame him for you." Lame him, she screamed. Law felt this terrible pain on his left arm, his left leg, and the left-hand side of his face, and collapsed in agony on the side of the road towards the Colne to Trawden road. He lay there for a good 5 hours. The kind people of Colne, this North Pendle town, could see him. They got a stretch team together, and they carried him into an old inn, which is long since gone, called the Greyhound Inn. There the landlord, Jonathan Edrington, spoon-fed him, cleaned him. And as Law's voice returned, Law shouted, "I've been cursed! There's a witch in the forest, a young lass with a dog. Swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's in league with devil. Send letters back to me family, please." Letters were sent from Colne back to Halifax, and John Law's eldest son, Abraham, received the first letter. "Hey, me father's in trouble, better go and collect him." Setter from Halifax arrived in Colne, walked into the old Greyhound Inn and saw his father in this twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you, man? You look terrible." "Abraham, I've been cursed. There's a witch in the forest, a young lass with a dog. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She didn't league with devil, lad. I want you to go and find her, bring her here, reverse the curse." Now, Abraham must have been quite a brave lad, really. He set off and walked deep into the forest of Pendle and found this cottage called Malkin Tower. Hammered on the door opened, and there was James Devise, Alison's brother. "Can I help you, sir?" "I want to see Alison Devise. Where is she?" "In here, sir." Alison came to the door. "Right, lass, you're coming with me," shouted Abraham. She was dragged down into the town of Colne, into the old Greyhound Inn, where she made eye contact with John Law, the Halifax peddler. He looked up from his sickbed and shouted, "It's you! It's you! You're witch! That dog you had, lass, I heard it talk, you're in league with devil." This 14-year-old girl on bended knees burst into tears and begged forgiveness. She had no idea. She just admitted to a state capital offence of witchcraft. And strange enough, John Law, the Halifax peddler, was about to forgive her, but not his son Abraham. "Oh no, we'll have you for this. I'm going to go and get magistrate." And in doing so, he opened the 1612 Pendle Witch Trials. The local magistrate was called Roger Noel. He lived in the village of Reed near Burnley. He was in charge of the whole area. He had the king's book, Demonology. He was fully aware of the king's paranoia relating to witchcraft. And indeed, Roger Noel himself had come across people of similar backgrounds. In fact, one man called Hartley, who had been a manservant, who apparently had tried to abuse his own children. He had him executed in 1600. However, he immediately gave orders that Alison should be arrested. She was brought to Reed Hall, Burnley, where, for the second time inside 24 hours, she burst into tears and begged forgiveness. But she gave Noel a lot more information. "My grandmother, she's a witch. So's Anne Whittle and her daughter Anne Redfern. We are familiars, sir." "Familiars," said Roger Noel. "Sir, dogs. Tib, Ball, Fancy, Dandy. These dogs, sir, belong to the Forwards, sir. They come to see us at different times, sir, and they give us special powers, sir. We've also been to Newchurch in Pendle, sir, and we have made clay pictures." "Clay pictures," said Roger Noel. "Sir, clay pictures of human beings, sir. We have indeed used human teeth and human hair, sir. We then select victims, sir. Our familiars give us permission to do this, sir, and give us powers. And we have indeed claimed lives, sir." Roger Noel was actually not frightened. He was quite delighted. And he gave orders that he would make his way straight to a place called Fence to meet Elizabeth Southern, James Devise, and young Jeanette Devise. There he heard more stories of witchcraft. And he had Anne Whittle, Anne Redfern, and indeed Elizabeth Southern sent straight to the city of Lancaster, where they met young Jeanette, where they met young Alison Devise. And this huge argument erupted amongst the four of them. They all tried to blame each other. There was no love between Demdike and Chattox. That was the nickname of Anne Whittle, Elizabeth Southern. They knew each other for many, many years. It said that Anne Whittle had broken into Malkin Tower and stolen items of clothing, etc. There's no love between these people whatsoever. So they tried to blame each other. But in doing so, they actually incriminated each other. They were sent from the beautiful Forest of Pendle over the Trough of Bowland and into the city of Lancaster, where they were thrown into Lancaster City Castle, a place called the Well Tower, which is still there to this very, very day. This deep, deep underground dungeon. There they were chained to the floor in absolutely appalling conditions. In the meantime, back in the Forest of Pendle, Elizabeth Devise was very worried about her mother, Elizabeth Southern, and very worried about her own daughter, Alison Devise. And she organised on Good Friday at Malkin Tower what has gone down in history as the most important part of the whole story, the Good Friday meeting, where all these other so-called witches met in the Forest of Pendle. Alison's brother James Devise slaughtered the sheep, and they dined on fresh mutton. They got a large cooking vessel out called a cauldron and lit a fire beneath the cauldron, and the black syrupy liquid inside began to bubble and steam. We are told from Thomas Potts's book that into that bubbling steam went crushed powdered human teeth, the odd clay pitcher, and indeed the odd human scalp. The whole idea apparently was to get a potion together to blow the gates of Lancaster City Castle open, murder Thomas Cavell, the head jailer, and free their loved ones. However, nothing happened. But what did happen is word of the Good Friday meeting reached the ears of Roger Nowell, the local magistrate. He gave immediate orders to the sheriffs of the forest to arrest all those people who'd attended the Good Friday meeting. When word filtered into the forest of Pendle, two people thought, there's no way we're going to hang around. Christopher Howgate and his wife Barbara, and they disappeared from the forest of Pendle. In doing so, they saved their lives. However, the ones that were successfully arrested were Jeanette Preston of Gisborne, West Yorkshire, Elizabeth Devise, James Devise, and indeed young Jeanette Devise of Malkin Tower. John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son Thomas from the village of Blackhoe, and probably the most famous of all these so-called witches, Alice Nutter of Roughly. They were all sent to Lancaster, with the exception of the two Jeanettes. Jeanette Preston, she came from Gisborne, West Yorkshire, so therefore she was sent to the city of York. Her husband went with her, villagers went with her, and they begged for her release. However, she was found guilty in the city of York of the murder of her employer, Mr. Thomas Lister. She'd been nursing him. He had died. She wrapped his body in a clean white sheet ready for burial. And 2 days before the burial, she touched the sheeting. And apparently, some fresh blood came through the sheet. This was classed as witchcraft. And she became the very, very first of the Pendle witches to be executed in the city of York on the 27th of July, 1612, at Whitmar Watmergate, at the far end of the shambles. The other Jeanette, this little girl from Malkin Tower, she was sent to live with the local magistrate, Roger Nowell. For the very, very first time in her life, she had 3 meals a day, a lovely warm bed to sleep in, and she also had nice clothes to wear. She had no idea, but she was going to play a very, very important role in the prosecution of her entire family.
Simon, can I just
yes,
only through the fact of that's what happens between right at your point in the story carrying on through to Lancaster, we would like to do as a part 2. So I'd like to stop you as a EastEnders moment, because it's the cliffhanger, what happens next. I would love to talk about what happened in, like you say, those little places, and I think a question's just popped up for you.
Yes,
Simon, obviously there's speculation about where Malkin Tower stood. Where do you think it is? From Sam.
Well, first of all, Sam, that's a fantastic question. Over the centuries, many, many historians have argued about the exact whereabouts of Malkin Tower. Many people believe it was indeed Blackhoe, and I do as well. There's certainly Malkin Tower Farm, which is in that region. When you look at the Pendle story, it's a bit like a football field. It's all very close together. You've got Downham, you've then got Barley, you've got Blackhoe, you've got Newchurch, you've got Roughly and Colne. They're all very, very close together, really. I personally believe that Malkin Tower wasn't Blackhoe, but we really and truly do not know 100%. But I feel it would have been in that area.
Thank you. Okay, so Karen, if it's okay if we move to you.
Yes.
Now, please. Very similar, except I have a feel your tale of Pendle may be very different to the one that Simon might tell us through the books that you write amazingly. Would you like to tell everybody what drew you to Pendle and your story? Tell your Pendle story. What's your story of the witches?
It won't surprise anyone that I was drawn to the Pendle story and the Witches of Pendle through books, through William Harrison Ainsworth's The Lancashire Witches, which I still have on my shelves, which I read as a teenager. Presumably Mistover Pendle as well. I can't quite remember, and I don't want to read it now because I'm writing, so I'll read it again once I finish my own writing. But it really grabbed me how a community turned on its own And so many women, children and men were sent to the gallows on spurious charges, really. And then there was the added aspect of Janet standing up in court and accusing her own family. And it just really grabbed me how, I mean, I grew up in a small village, a small Yorkshire village, and I knew how much we all depend on each other in a small community, and it would have been even more so back then. And it was that really, it was the dynamics of the community, of the families. And then as I grew older and understood more about the law, about religion, because of course it was all after the dissolution and the change from Catholicism to Protestants. It was right after the gunpowder treason, so that's all in the mix as well. And it's just such a volatile mix of motives, opportunities, and human nature that resulted in just this horrendous end result. And that's what grabbed me, and it's never let me go. So I think...
Okay. What do you think life would have been like within the walls of Malkin Tower?
Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous.
Okay.
I think they'd been living hand to mouth. There were 3 generations living together, nobody with a steady job. At that time, as Simon rightly says, women were nothing. Poor women, even worse. Poor women without a husband. Oh my goodness, what on earth are they doing on that land? We could do better with that. So they would have struggled to feed themselves,
absolutely,
to live, to clothe themselves, and they would have had to fight for every day of their lives. And I think that's even the fact that Elizabeth Southerns lived to such an age is an amazing achievement. But it's, again, as Simon intimated, I think the fact that she did live to such an age in such circumstances would have then worked against her and would have been viewed as proof against her. So they really would have been fighting just to live. And of course, their little plots of land, the enclosures were starting to happen, land owning and farming techniques were changing. So the wealthy landowners all around them, they wanted them. They wanted that land. So they were in the way. They were nothing. They were in the way. And I think one last point is moving to the Protestant view, whereas Catholicism and the monasteries, they looked after the poor. They had alms, and one of their roles was to look after people like the Devers family. Protestants,
do you think that's perhaps
the opposite?
Do you think that's perhaps where Alice Nutter could... No, it's fine. Do you think perhaps that's where maybe Alice Nutter could come into the story with her religious beliefs and her family's religious beliefs?
Quite possibly.
Was she perhaps charitable cause towards those less fortunate as herself, perhaps?
Assuming she was Catholic, then yes, it would have, especially Good Friday as well, it would have been absolutely in her mindset to help those less fortunate and to give alms and to give food.
Yeah.
Whereas the magistrates, the Protestants, or the Puritans, they believed that if you were born in poor circumstances, that's because you defended God. So you were born into the circumstances that you deserved. So there was no alms, there was no pity, there was no compassion. And it was a pretty awful place to live if you were born on the wrong side of the breadline.
I think a question just popped up for you, Karen, from Karina. Do you think that the man in the lane had possibly had a stroke? And do you think they picked up an old woman in order to get rid of the land?
Yes, and yes, that's one of the reasons.
Okay.
I think, yes, John Law, the symptoms are very clearly that of a stroke, which at the time was called the half-dead disease. So they would have feared those symptoms as well. So Alison would have been accused of half killing him. And they picked on the old women in order to get them off the land. Yes, they were surrounded by big estates where farming techniques were changing. And it was changing from the old Lord of the Manor owning everything and the villagers having their strip farms to the farming system that we know today, where landowners had swathes of land which they worked, and they were in the way, and they just have good land, small pockets of land, but the big farmers could do much more with it when they combined it with their own. So yes and yes.
Okay. So Tom, that brings us to you, and I'm not sure if you missed the brief bit about what I was asking from you. I would just like you very briefly. Are you with us? I think you are.
Yes, hello.
Tom's experiencing a bit of a delay on his equipment, so we just bear with him. Just in your own words, I know that you base everything on fact, and you back up everything that you preach or you educate people with fact. Could you give us a factual, brief account of what you believed to have happened up to the point where they were taken off for the Lancaster Assizes in August?
Oh, are you on mute, Tom?
Maybe.
So he's muted his
Oh,
mic. I can't unmute.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, no, he's gone again.
Hello?
That's
Hello.
Hello?
Did you hear that bit? I can hear you now. Did you hear that I asked?
I'm having great difficulty, actually. I can only hear very small segments. It's indiscernible, I'm afraid.
Okay. So if possible, can you hear me now? Can you give me a very brief account as to what you believed happened between 1612 March and 1612 August, just before our ladies and gentlemen of Pendle, witches, if you please, were taken to the assizes?
I'm afraid, I'm very sorry. I can't quite make out the full question.
Your story, Tom. Tell us your story of the witches. How about that one?
Well, I actually believe Simon. I can't really add to what Simon said already. I'd only like to elaborate on certain locations and perhaps people in the story later on. But I thought Simon did a marvelous job of the events as they happened. I can't really add to what he said already.
That's perfect. So on the point of elaborating, is there somewhere, I mean, this is all about forgotten Pendle, is there somewhere you believe skips the page of the book, so to speak, somewhere that we walk past every day, somewhere where you drive past in your car and you'd have no idea what you were looking at, that would be crucial to the story?
Yes, one of them would have to be St. Bartholomew Church in Colne.
Can you tell us why, please?
Yes, most people are unaware that one of the women on trial in 1612 is actually buried there. And that's Alice Gray of Colne. If you go to the parish register, you can actually see she on page 6 and entry 192. Alice Gray de Colne was buried in 1613, shortly after the trials, and it's also the resting place of Richard Baldwin of Wheathead, his daughter Eleanor, who Demdike is supposed to have bewitched to death. The constable who visited Malkin Tower, I believe he may be buried there. The records are quite diverse, so I can't be sure. I know for a fact he was married
Hargreaves.
there.
Would that be Tom Hargreaves?
Henry Hargreaves of Water Meetings. And possibly the most interesting person for me who's buried there would actually be Anne Townley of Carhall. And Yes.
I mean,
it's quite-
correct me if I'm wrong, Anne Townley, didn't she promise James Device some turf and he came to collect it and she doubled back on herself and then said, oh, no, nothing was promised. I'm terribly sorry. To which he went home empty-handed.
almost.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but maybe a year later did she pass away?
Yes, Anne Townley was actually one of James Devise's victims, apparently. James had had an argument with her, and she actually hit him in the back, apparently, and he then got his familiar to put a curse on her, according to Thomas Potts's book, that is.
That's right.
Oh.
James was actually found
okay.
guilty of 4 murders, really, and Anne Townley was one of them. And of course, as we just heard, the Church St. Bartholomew is one of the oldest in the whole of East Lancashire. And there's a lot of history there as well, actually. But all those characters are definitely buried there. They really are.
Yeah. If I may just elaborate very quickly on Anne.
Of course.
Well, what's interesting is the church was actually built by Robert de Lacy, and of course he's the son of Ilbert de Lacy, who fought with William the Conqueror at Hastings in 1066. So there's quite an interesting piece of history there already on its own. But Robert had a son, an illegitimate son rather, called Ralph the Red. And I want you to just hold that thought for just one moment, because Anne Townley was actually born Anne Catterall, and she was most likely born at Little Mitton Hall. It's now just known as Mitton Hall. And Mitton Hall was built in the late 15th century by Ralph Catterall. And what's fascinating to me is that Anne's grandmother married Alexander Knoll of Reed Hall, who of course would be related to Roger Knoll. And Anne Catterall and the Catterall family generally, they married into a family called de Mitton, and the progenitor of the de Mitton family was Ralph the Red. So we have a very interesting tapestry of history around that area. So it's interesting for me in the sense of it gives us a slight insight into the power dynamics that of 1612 and how the local gentry and the powerful families held on to power throughout the centuries. And that's why I'm very interested in Anne Townley. She married Henry Townley of Barnside.
So, Tom, if I was to mention a lane to you, so if I was to perhaps say to you, Hayes Lane, would that have any connection to the witches?
Yes, it would. It's the old ancient track route that connects Barley with Roughly. And it's most likely where Alison Davis first encountered the familiar spirit in the close of John Robinson, whether real, imagined, or so on.
Oh, okay.
It's a tenuous link.
Somewhere where people would like to take their dog for a walk and stroll down that lane. Little did they know that lurking somewhere there could be a large black dog, a familiar perhaps.
That's one way of putting it, I suppose.
I'm letting Karen's imagination run with this.
I'm making notes.
I thought you might be. So just
I'm just
just on that note, Karen, just with you. No?
Sorry,
You say something, Scott, were
I
you?
didn't hear that.
I'm going to stick up with some comments. I'm going to stick them up to the panel and
Okay.
see what you think of them. Bear with me a second, I'll just get them up. Andy Murphy has a question for you. Who do you think lived in the house found near Lower Black Moss Reservoir? No signs of witchcraft and with the cat in the sealed room. Is this possibly welcome to our location? It's open to anybody.
I think that's one of the 4 possibles in my mind, and I approach it with a very open mind to try and work out which is more plausible and which fits in the story the best. I think having a cat in a sealed room or in the walls was actually very common, so it could have been anyone. It doesn't point to a witch or somebody scared of witchcraft to be that. It was just common practice at that time. And many houses from that period, there is something there, whether it's a cat, it could be an old boot, it could be a witch bottle, it could be all sorts of things that are buried in the walls. Personally, I think it's a little bit far out of where most of the action happens, where most of the cursings and the accused cursings, and the places where we know that Demdike in particular met with people, whether it's at Bull Hole, and the Sadler's Farm area, all around there. Bearing in mind she was in her 80s, blind and half lame, led about by a young child. I think that's a long way for her to walk regularly and to be led regularly. So for me, it's unlikely that that would be Malkin Tower, would be my feeling.
Thank you, Simon. Here's one for yourself, sir. Heather Henderson. After watching Haunted Hunts, excuse me, do you believe that the site uncovered by the utilities company was Malkin Tower?
This was the same building we've just been talking about, actually. Way back in 2012, I got a very excited telephone call from United Utilities. They've been working at the dam, Black Moss Dam, and behind the dam they saw a rocky knoll, and they thought, let's do an investigatory dig. And they found the roof of a very, very old cottage, and they thought, this is no work for water engineers. And they contacted the authorities. They brought in a team from, I think it was Loughborough University. The archaeological students removed a lot of soil. And as a tour guide, I felt very honoured to be invited to look at it. And as I walked inside this very old building, it was quite confusing because one half was very, very old. The other half was late 18th century, really. I did meet the head professor from the university, and he had a Tupperware dish, and in that Tupperware dish was indeed the remains of a cat. They mentioned that they'd found a recess, and behind the recess they took some more bricks out and found these cats together. Of course, we do know from Thomas Potts's book, and indeed the History of Witches, that they need what's called a familiar, which comes in the form of a dog or a cat. And many people believe that this cat, like so many similar situations throughout the whole of East Lancashire, was there as a medieval burglar alarm, if you will. The national headlines, I remember that same day they had a press release and the Daily Mail arrived, Good Morning America arrived, Canadian TV, Russian TV. But no one could exactly say, was it Malkin Tower? Because we really and truly don't know. What we do know is that quite a few people would go there in the early hours of the morning and steal stones. And 1 or 2 people fell in the dam as well. And United Utilities thought of that famous word, health and safety. And what they've done is they've completely reburied the old cottage. It was in the Blacko area, which is very much in the Pendle Witch map. But again, there's no firm evidence as to whether this was Malkin Tower or not, really.
A comment from Don Hilton. Water meetings is an interesting area at the foot of Black Coat Great Energy. Here's a question, Karina Rocks. Once it pops up, bear with me. There's not. There it's there. Got it eventually. Sorry, folks. Can I ask you, think Queen Elizabeth tolerated witches the same way she tolerated all religions?
Interesting question. Well, I don't think the witch fervour had really reached England. It had reached Scotland at the time of her reign, and it really ties back in more with James, and it was more of a European thing, and then James I, or James VI of Scotland as he was. Tolerated all religions. She didn't really. She burned an awful lot of Catholics. So it just wasn't as much at the forefront of people's minds, I think, in Elizabethan times. They were more bothered about Catholics, and she was also bothered about trying to find a middle line while burning the people that disagreed with her or were any kind of threat. And don't forget, she had the Spanish Armada as well, so it was focused more on Catholics. And she did an amazing job, because she is known for being more tolerant, but that's compared to Mary, or Bloody Mary, who came before her, and James, who came after her. I think the word tolerant there is quite relevant, I'm afraid, Corinne. Now, what do the others think?
Andy's got sorry, Cam.
I'll just say,
Andy's got
what
an
do the others
interesting.
think?
What's your opinion, Simon?
Well, there's no two ways about it. King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England in 1603. And this man was paranoid, absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. And this book of demonology does refer to that, of course. But you look at many historians believe that Queen Elizabeth I was probably our finest ever monarch. And she seems to be very, very busy defending the country. And of course, she was a woman herself, of course. And when you look at some people like the incredible Alice Nutter, she was a wealthy lady. And there's a lot of shrouding mystery about her, really. There's been 3 different versions of how she was arrested. And the one I do prefer to look at, really, is perhaps more of a legend than fact, where she had complained about land disputes. And in those days, women weren't allowed to possess a brain, and she'd complained to Roger Nowell, who'd done nothing about it. And there has been a saying that she went to Lancaster and complained about her land disputes and won them fairly and squarely. And Nowell wasn't at all impressed by this and thought, I need revenge. How can I get revenge? I can accuse her of witchcraft. What we do know is that the trials at Lancaster, she was found guilty of aiding Demdike, who's Elizabeth Southern, and her daughter Alison Device, in the murder of Henry Mytton of Rough Lee, because he wouldn't give them a penny. We do know that Alice would not have needed to beg. She was a woman of quite wealth, really. Her home in Rough Lee is gorgeous. It's called Rough Lee Hall. It's a Grade 1 listed building. And why Spielberg has never made a film, I don't know, because it's got everything you'd associate with a Hollywood thriller there, really.
So, Karen, just coming back to you, I know. Sorry, Tom, were you going to say something then? Did I? I think this did. I'm not sure if I interrupted him. I'm not sure. Okay.
No.
I'm sure you'll chip in if it was. Oh, sorry. Okay, so Karen, coming back to you. So, is there anywhere that you think falls into the forgotten Pendle? Is there anywhere that you think this feels like something could have happened here? This fits. Is there something that you think has been forgotten? Quite right, as Simon says, the only factual account we have is the court accounts from Thomas Potts. Nothing was kept in those tiny villages. Is there somewhere that you think we've forgotten?
Well, there'll be an awful lot of places that have been forgotten that are important in the story, and I don't know how we'll ever find out. I come at this from a point of view from the outside in, with research and piles and piles and piles of bookcase full of books about the area, the story, the history, and I think that the best thing I can contribute to that really is another option for Malkin Tower. It's something I picked up in John Clayton's book, is the Lancashire Witch Conspiracy. but actually in his 4th centenary edition, that's the one, he makes a very good case for Malkin Tower to actually be in Barley, which is a little bit south of Blacko, and it's a lot closer to where all the action that we know of happens. And he puts, I hope it's okay to show this. It's something, it's from his book, and he's plotted out a map of everything that happened and who it was attributed to. And what's very interesting on there is that in the Sadler's Farm area, the Goldshore area and Bull Hole, that's where both Chattocks and Demdike, that's where they clash. And I can almost see, and of course I'm a fiction author, I use my imagination a lot. You've got Chattocks a bit further south at West Close, you've got Demdike a bit further north at Barley, and then Newchurch, that's where their territories meet, and that's where they clash. So I think there's a forgotten area of Pendle really is Barley. And that's the first place I'll be going to when I'm allowed.
Oh, there's a question. Has there ever been an attempt to make the accused pardoned?
There certainly has. In 2012, we had the 400th anniversary of this tragic story, really. And in the town of Burnley, you'll come across a brewery called Morehouses. And they have a range of beers, all named after the Pendle Witches. A petition was organised through Morehouses to get the Pendle Witches pardoned. I signed it along with some 12,500 other people. And this was taken to the then Home Secretary, a gentleman called Jack Straw. He immediately said, no, these people are enemies of the state. And he made it very, very strong that that they would always be enemies of the state. It's almost as if the government has something to cover up here, really.
Interesting. More notes.
Which could maybe tie in with the other things, that Pendle has been known for, plane crashes, UFO sightings. That that there's been all sorts of other unexplained things on that brooding.
The one that I really do like is George Fox. And George Fox, of course, he made his way to Pendle Hill a good 180 years later, and sat on top of Pendle Hill and had a vision of a brand new religion called the Quaker movement. And he got his inspiration from Pendle Hill.
Oh. So, Thomas, can I just direct this question at you? Why are the Wheatley Lane Witches in 1635 never mentioned?
As in by people generally. Well, first of all,
I would think so.
Yeah, it wouldn't be 1635. Sorry to be pedantic. It was 1633. The trials were held the following year. I'd respond by saying they were very well known in the 17th century. They actually held plays in London when some of the accused were taken down for examinations. So I would say they're probably not quite as well remembered. Mainly due to the pathos of the story in 1612, it's a lot more sinister and tragic, and the second trials ended in acquittal. So, in a sense, they haven't made the same impact on local history and folklore.
Would that be the trial then that then ties in with we mentioned before in a conversation between the two of us, Brown Brink's farm? Is that what ties in with Thorne's Wheatley Lane Witches?
Yes, Henry Parker with Brown Brinks. The Parker family were farming there for since at least the early 16th century. Hugh Parker settled there. And Edmund Robinson, he lived with his father just to the south, probably near what's now the White Swan. I believe it's the White Swan. There's so many pubs in my head, I can't quite recall the name. And
Because they're all closed, that's what you're having withdrawal symptoms.
And Edmund Robinson claimed to have encountered a boy with a cloven foot in a field called the Ollers, which was part of Brownbrinks. And most of his testimonies actually centered on that area. And I can just add in, actually, the Parker family actually have a grave at St. Mary's in Newchurch, directly opposite the Nutter grave. Not many people know about this. And the person buried there is Henry Parker, but it's actually the son and heir of Henry Parker from the second trials of 1634. I know because I've found his will, transcribed his will. So the
I think
Parker
we can
family,
view that on your blog, can't we?
it's closed right now, I'm afraid. It's part of some terms I've agreed while I'm filming a documentary.
Okay.
But on my Facebook page, you should be able to see details of the Parker will and just my research into the Parker family.
Perfect. So thank you. Simon, just coming to you, is there anywhere that you think we could be missing? A bit same as sort of the question that I directed at Karen. Do you think that there's somewhere that we're missing the chain of the link? Do you think that there's somewhere that could be quite crucial to the story, but it never gets to tell its story?
Well,
I mean, there was
I think
It
there's
is.
a delay.
all right. We have him. I think so. Or maybe
No, we
even
still have them.
Christopher Howgate. Whereabouts did they live? Could their house be
Christopher
something
Howgate.
crucial?
I understand Christopher
Could
Howgate
something
was
have
actually
happened and like visited them? Oh, are we all back in the room? Are we all?
Yes, I'm here.
Everybody's back. Everybody's on, aye.
Oh,
Something's
okay.
going on.
Yeah,
It's
there
fine.
is. Yeah, we're kind of. So sorry, Simon. Just going back to that point, Christopher Howgate. Do you think that their connection to the witches? Do you think maybe we're missing something there? Do you think they were perhaps more involved than is documented in anywhere, or history-wise? Is their story needing to be told?
Well, we have to rely entirely on Jeanette Devise. When she was brought to Lancaster, she mentioned this Good Friday meeting, and she mentioned the people that had been there. We have to rely on her story being honest and truthful, as written by Thomas Potts. I understand that Christopher Howgate was indeed directly related to Elizabeth Devise, and he left with his wife Barbara. Apparently, they were the only people to actually leave the Forest of Pendle when they knew about imminent arrests. What happened to them after that, we don't know. What we do know is they weren't actually arrested with the rest of them. They may have had advance warning of the imminent arrest that were going to take place after the Good Friday meeting. A lot of this story, of course, is shrouded in not so much secrecy, but being blurred by the centuries, really. And many good authors will mix fiction with non-fiction to tie things together, really. but certainly Thomas Potts is the only window we have into this whole story from his perspective.
Do you believe that perspective was as accurate as he wanted it to be?
Well, as Tom quite rightly mentioned, in Colne, Catherine Hewitt and Alice Gray were both arrested. They both came from Colne, and Alice Gray was acquitted. And in Thomas Potts's book, he puts her as being one of the Salisbury Hall witches, but she definitely came from Colne. Also acquitted with Jeanette and Ellen Brearley and Jane South from Salisbury Hall was Lawrence Hay, Isabel Sygroves, and indeed John Ramsden. They were also classed as Salisbury Hall witches, but they were tried at the same time and acquitted at the same time. But there's again a lot of there's no sort of like the accusations against them are not really recorded. They were just recorded as being arrested and found not guilty.
Forgotten. So, do you believe, and this is your own personal opinion, Karen? Do you believe that they were cunning women? They were trying to do good things. You know, back in 1612, you couldn't pop to the salon to have a colour test on your hair to check you're allergic to anything. So they mixed up a lotion or a potion using nettles. And just like Simon says, even modern day medicine is based very much so on plants. Somebody'd mix you up some nettle tea for a bad cough and you'd go away and drink it. And you'd have an adverse allergic reaction.
Yeah.
Or do you believe that they knew exactly what they were doing? Do you believe that the knowledge had been passed through the generations, that they knew exactly what to mix and exactly who to give it to?
I think they knew the land. I think they knew their history. There's obviously a family of women and strong women to have survived. Knowledge would have been passed down. I think from what is in Thomas Potts' book, there's Catholic incantations in there as well. And I think a lot of it was doing what they needed to do to survive. So they knew what to do with the land. That was their only resource. So that was their food larder. That was their medicine cabinet. And they obviously had skill because they were called upon. And if you know what works well, you also know what harms. They go together. And it's quite interesting that the words cure and curse only have one letter different. And I think they were desperate. They needed to eat, and they needed to find ways of doing it. And I can certainly believe they were guilty of extortion. Give us some alms, give us some bread, give us some blue milk, or we'll curse this, that, and the other. And because they were in a nuisance, I also believe that they were easy to blame. If a neighbour's cow got sick, they were the easiest cause to blame. And what kind of defence could they mount? So it's all a bit of everything, really. I don't think it's as clear cut as that. I think it's a bit of everything, and they got by however they could.
Absolutely. I love your answer. I love that answer. But just, Tom, bringing you in, Karen mentioned something about there being just women, you know, they were strong women. Maybe you can help us out with, why are the men so forgotten in this? Where was Squinting Lizzie, you know, Elizabeth Device's husband? Where was he? What happened to him?
Well, John Devis was supposedly a victim of Chattox's witchcraft for refusing to pay. He was essentially, as Karen said, he was a victim of extortion. And he is actually mentioned in Thomas Potts' account at the end amongst all the other victims. So, I mean, I don't really know what else to add to that.
No, that's spot on. Yeah. It's just kind of, because sometimes I feel stereotypically when you think of a witch, you automatically think of a woman, don't you? To a certain extreme. But this wasn't the case. Simon, do you believe that the men of Pendle, that the men that were called the witches, do you think they somewhat get forgotten? Could it only have been James Device? Could it only have been a young boy, perhaps suffering from learning difficulties from what's reported? Could it just have been him? Or could there be others that
Well,
have been forgotten?
James, he actually really self-incriminated himself, really. He mentioned these clay pictures that had been made at Malkin Tower, and even told the magistrates that there was one that had been buried near the door entrance, and this was actually dug up and retrieved. Along with him and his sister Jeanette, they more or less incriminated their whole family and themselves, of course. James was classed as a bit of a dimwit, apparently. But what is quite shocking is that when he was brought into the courts in August 1612, the lad was lapsing in and out of consciousness. He had to be held up by 2 warders. But he freely admitted to the murder of Anne Townley, John Hargreaves, Hugh and Blaise Hargreaves, and also John Duckworth. He actually admitted to these crimes and seems to be happy to go to his death that way, really.
Okay. So just, I think a final point. I think we might have a couple of questions. I think somewhere. I've read a couple that have caught my eye in the screen. The whole point of Forgotten Pendle. Do you think this is a tale that will ever be forgotten?
It's unlikely. It's lived 400 years. It sparks imagination, debates, and it only seems to be gathering momentum somehow as well. And I think as more people are trying to find the truth in any way they can, whether it's authors like me trying to put the pieces together into the most plausible story, whether it's paranormal groups looking to connect with the past in a more visceral way and try and get clues. Thomas and Simon with the historian and the really searching out all the facts and all the records and finding all the details that's possible. It's only going to grow. I think the fact that it's also woven in with a second gunpowder plot makes it even more explosive, if I can use that word. So it's not going to go away. It's not going to go away because it's caught too many people's imagination, and just the area as well, Lancashire, Pendle Hill. It's such a brooding, atmospheric place. And even in pictures, not just in person, but even in pictures, every picture I see of Pendle Hill, it has a different mood. And that grabs people's imaginations as well. And it tugs at the heart and it tugs at the imagination as well. And no, the stories aren't going to go away. I don't think so at all.
Can I just add to that?
I have to agree.
Yeah, I totally agree with Karen as well. You know, it's been 400-500 years down the line. And as I said the last time we had you in, Karen, you know, there's been various witch trials down through the centuries in all different parts of the UK, but the witches, again, is the one that everybody wants to know about. And I don't think, you know, it's been a big drop for me, as I've said many times on the lives for many, many years. And I don't think it'll ever be forgotten. No disrespect to the other witch trials and victims there. They'll certainly never be forgotten either. But I don't think Pendle will be is going anywhere soon, as they say. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
I was typing, where are all the witches? There's one. Dawn Hilton, where are all the witches, Catholics or mixed religious?
Great question. Catholics
Absolutely.
accuse Protestants of being witches, and Protestants accuse Catholics of being witches. There were 2 witch hunting Bibles. We've mentioned demonology a few times, which is the one that King James wrote, and this was the Protestant witch hunting Bible, as Simon has explained, which was how to find a witch, what to do with a witch when you find her. But the Catholics had their own witch hunting Bible, and that was, we mentioned the Salisbury witches, and that was Catholics accusing Protestants of witchcraft, and they used the Malleus Maleficarum. And if you look at Grace Sowerbutt's testimony at the Salisbury witch trials, it is straight out of this book what she accused her aunt and her grandmother of doing. So it was, yeah, the Catholics would accuse the Protestants of witchcraft, and the Protestants would accuse the Catholics of witchcraft. It was the easiest way to get at the enemy, unfortunately, and the people were caught in the middle.
Which is sad. And what you just mentioned, Karen, I do believe that features in one of your books, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, yes. Divided by Witchcraft. Thank you. Thank you for the plug. Yes, Divided by Witchcraft.
Yeah.
So I've written 2 Pendle Witch stories so far. The first one, Murder by Witchcraft, is about Janet Preston, who Simon has mentioned, and who was tried at York for killing her lord of the manor. And then Salisbury Witches I've written about in Divided by Witchcraft. And I've focused on Janet and Ellen Beerley, Jane Southworth, and the Catholic priest in hiding, Father Southworth, and Grace Sowerbutt, who was the manipulated young accuser. And I actually had great fun writing that book. It was really difficult because I wrote it from Grace Sowerbutt's point of view. So she was the young 14-year-old who'd been manipulated by the priest, accusing her family, and being fed all this stuff that's in here, and it's pretty horrific stuff to put into somebody's mind, especially at that time and age. And I really had to jolt myself thinking that these were real people. This really happened to this family. This really happened. And quite often I'd come away from writing, I'd be so completely lost in that time and those people. And I'd come back to myself and I just, floods of tears running down when I just remembered they are real people. This happened. So, and I'm now working on the main trial with Roger Knoll, Dan Dyke and Chattox, and the same thing's starting to happen there as well.
Oh, Simon, can I give you the question below? Because I know you're here, there, and everywhere. So, do you think that Pendle was more popularised by being investigated by TV programmes such as Most Haunted, or did it have the same momentum prior to being televised as much as it has been?
Well, in my job as a tour guide, I do get quite a few paranormal companies that will contact me, and their interest is the paranormal side to the Pendle Witch story. And there's no two ways about it. Most Haunted, the TV show, really did highlight the Pendle Witch story to the paranormal world, if you will. And I know Yvette Fielding said that it was the most frightening show she'd ever been involved in, the Pendle one. But there's so much in this story, and as I've mentioned before, if Steven Spielberg really got his act together, he would have a Hollywood blockbuster of huge proportions, and it would be a huge success as well, really, because there's a lot of characters in there that perhaps could be portrayed slightly differently.
Thank you. You're a question for Frankie.
Maybe on a ley line. I personally don't think it is. I could be mistaken, but I don't think it is. Unless anybody else disagrees.
I don't know.
I think I'm not sure where Tom's gone, but maybe had a different view. Simon, do you agree with me? Would you say Pendle is not on a ley line, or?
I really, in all fairness, don't actually know, but I do know Frankie actually, and I know she's been involved in a film that was made quite some time ago. And if I'm correct, I think Frank is actually writing a book about ley lines, and I'm no expert on that, but who knows? It's possible. It's quite possible.
I'll have to find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're back with us, but maybe you could shed a little more light on that one. James Device may have been tortured to admit that he could have had goal fever. It's debatable. I have to say that they weren't treated very nicely at all. And in our part 2, we really go into depth as to what actually happened, because the Well Tower was not as grand as it sounds by any means. So I think, Maureen, thank you. We'll come to that in our part 2.
Hi, Steve. I'll let
Karen,
you know.
I do believe that's
I will let you know. I'll let you know. I'm working on it, busy working on it, but I haven't got a date yet.
My ex-husband was Roger Moore, and
Or maybe one for you, Simon.
Well,
Just let you know that her ex-husband.
Witchfinder General would actually be Matthew Hopkins, and he was a lot further towards the end of that century, really. Quite a nasty piece of work, Hopkins, really. I think it's fair to say he had the blood of many an innocent woman and girl in his hands. He had a rather nasty piece of equipment called the witching stick, which looked a bit like a bayonet, a bit like a knife, really. As it touched the human flesh, it would actually retract into the sheath of the knife, and he would have his victim in the court tied up and stab her and say, look, she's not even felt any pain. And as a result, the knife had actually gone back into the sheath, and she said, well, I can't feel any pain. So Hopkins was the Witchfinder General. Very, very nasty piece of work. But he wasn't involved in anything to do with the Pendle Witch trials or indeed the Pendle Witch story.
Okay. I think are we? No, we've got another one. I thought I'd hang fire because I thought I could sense one coming. Dawn thinks that Pendle is on a ley line and runs from the Avery to the Firth of Scotland. Oh, okay. Maybe, yeah, definitely. Maybe something for us to have a little bit more research into, because it's, things like this. This is what this is about: the forgotten questions. Thank you, Dawn.
Maureen Mowbridge has got a big call to take a wee minute or two to read it, folks, if that's okay.
The 400th anniversary of the trials have most definitely made the area a more popular tourist attraction. I was brought up in the area, living very close to many of the places mentioned, and when I was young, it wasn't a tourist area, but all by frequented just by people on country walks from the surrounding towns and villages of Burrowford, Nelson and Colne. Also, so I think what Maureen's saying from that is the question that we had, as with Pendle being televised by Company as Most Haunted, that she agrees that yes, by putting it on the telly, it's made a big impact to that.
I think television did tweak a lot of people's interest, and unfortunately, this is just my opinion, but a lot of some of the interest probably wasn't genuine, just people being kind of nosy, want to find out what it was about, basically. But no, I think the TV did spark spreading word around. Again, that's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a huge thing to fear. I mean, just quite rightly, as Simon says, the king was so paranoid. He was he was out of his own mind some days with paranoia. I mean, and quite rightly so. Quite rightly so. If you look back at the things that's happened to him, I would be paranoid if somebody tried to blast my house or my castle or home to pieces, which has happened to him. But I think also that we forget about his upbringing himself. And I think, Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, come into power quite young. I think, did he take the reign quite young?
Yeah, King James, of course, he was Mary Queen of Scots' son. And apparently when Queen Elizabeth died, she insisted that he became King of England. She insisted. I think she felt remorse about having his mother executed, really. And but he was an ardent Protestant, and he hated the Catholics with a vengeance. and as we all know, rewrote the Bible, of course, and had this real hatred of Catholics and associated Catholicism with witchcraft. So he really had a big impact on the whole story, really, a huge impact.
Yeah, I think sometimes he kind of gets a little forgotten, I think, in the story of
Yeah,
it all.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Maybe there's
When you
a
look at
lot
his-
more to him. His past and the things that he must have endured, as a child,
Oh, yeah.
could have had a massive impact on the way that he would think and perceive the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, his father was murdered. His mother was executed. When his wife first tried to come to England, as Simon's already touched on, witches brought up a storm and stopped her. So he had to go to Denmark. There was more witchcraft involved there as well. And you can't blame him for being paranoid. The childhood and upbringing and events in his life that happened. It's all goes into the cauldron, doesn't it? And what comes out.
It does, yeah.
And-
Give it a big mix and then we'll just pull something out.
I think there's a lot more people were involved in Pendle. I think that, when you talk about Pendle, people tend to focus on the accused, Roger Knowles, Alice Nutter, John Law, Thomas Potts, the sort of main characters, for wanting a better word, but I think what people don't realise is there was a lot of other people involved, family members of the community, etc., that actually never get, they might get a mention in a book somewhere, whatever, but they actually never get really spoken about. And some of them probably played quite a big part in the whole, the whole process, basically. Again, that's just my thought. There's a lot more to it, behind the scenes sort of thing.
Yeah.
If I'm not sure if Shazalena, I'm not sure post on the Pendle Witch page later. I know it passes the Stones of Cumbria. Thank you, Dawn. Thomas keeps coming and disappearing, so I'm not sure if he's here. Are you back in the room, Tom? Are you back with us?
I wasn't
Okay.
aware I was disappearing.
Can you hear me?
actually.
Oh, okay. Just a question for you. We talk about the forgotten people of Pendle. When I've spoken to people about Pendle, I say, okay, so we're talking about two feuding families. Can you tell me their names? And Simon, I'm sure you'll agree with me. The first name that they all jump in with is Alice Nutter. And yet she wasn't part of the two feuding families. No, she wasn't part of Demdikes and Chattocks. But what about Alice's family? She's only ever spoke about in the trial of it. But it wasn't just her. There was more people involved. She had a son, a husband.
Mm-hmm.
What about those, Tom? Could you tell me anything about those?
Yes, I mean, Alice was married to Richard Nutter, of course. He's actually buried at St. Mary's in Newchurch. He died in 1584, I believe. She also had a son called Miles. He was also buried there. The year that Edmund Robinson made his testimony or created his story. And as for Alice, she was actually born Whitaker. And they were traditionally a Catholic family. I'm trying to. What else would you like to know about?
Just touching on that then, with you mentioned the burial. Rumour or folklore has it that within the grounds of St Mary's Church in Pendle, in Newchurch in Pendle, there lies a witch's grave.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's watched our short video that we made, there's speculation that the body of a witch lies in there. Do Karen, Simon, or Thomas, do you believe that within the grounds of that area there lies the grave of a witch?
No.
that she would not, if she'd been found guilty and hanged as a witch, she would not have been buried on consecrated ground. It would go completely against all the religious ideals, and of course this was all fueled by partly fueled by religion. No, she wouldn't have been.
So Thomas, who lies within that grave then? If it's not Alice, who is it?
It's a branch of the Nutter family. It's yeoman farmers from Goldshaw Booth. The grave is a much later date, and obviously it wouldn't make much sense for Alice to be buried in the grave of Richard's very distant relatives. Notwithstanding the fact it's impossible anyway, because the grave's a much later date. We'd expect her to be buried with her husband Richard or her son Miles, and it's just part of local folklore. It's quite well established who the people are buried in the grave. You can check the parish registers, the various wills online where the people are mentioned. Of course, she could have been buried in subterfuge, but there's no evidence at all for it.
No, and we can find a few of those posts, like you say, on your Facebook page if people follow the Pendle Witch blog. As your Facebook page, I think we can find a lot of fantastically, massively formal and factual information on there. So anybody, Thomas is definitely worth a follow.
Yes, I second that.
Yeah. It won't be just me and you then, Karen, that perhaps message him almost instantly. So I'm sort of almost drawing up to a close. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank all three of you for your time. And I know it's such a vast subject to talk about. It wasn't even a legal requirement to register your baby back then. So to have actual stories put together, we all tell our own tale in so many different ways, which is why I believe Pendle is so captivating and fascinating, because you can turn it into anything you want to turn it to. But for anybody that hasn't been, the aura and the atmosphere is absolutely something else. People from all over the world come. I'm sure you'll agree, Simon, with your tours, you take people from all over the world because you're so fantastic, and let them experience the awe of it all for themselves. So there is so much that's forgotten from Pendle. There is so much that's forgotten on history, which is what us here at the Paranormal in History are hoping, well, we will be trying to bring as much of it to light for you as you can, of all these places that may be forgotten, of all these stories that are not quite told fully, but you understand, to get both sides, witches or cunning women, guilty or innocent. Only you can make your own mind up. But thank you ever so much, the three of you. And I'm going to pass you back to Scott. Absolute pleasure. And I would, you could join me for our
Thanks very much, Joe. Karen, Simon, Thomas, absolutely brilliant. I've got no words, absolutely. It's always a pleasure having you on. Thomas has been an absolute delight. I hope we'll see you again. It's exactly the way we want you to go. Forgotten Pendle. We've heard a lot of names tonight. We've heard a lot of facts, dates, events that we never knew about. Well, we didn't know about, and I'm sure a lot of people who came into the chat didn't know about. So, if I can just hold on, it's just for the usual wee second after we go off. We'll wind it up there just now, but we will be doing a Forgotten Pendle Part 2, as Joe said as well. That'll be posted on our Facebook page when it comes. So we hope you've enjoyed it all tonight. We've still had one of the, the creme de la creme of the panel when it comes to Pendle Hill, the top minds in the UK, I'd say. And thanks again. So we're back next Wednesday, I think it is. I'll need to check the diary. So take care, everybody, for now. And be safe. And until next time. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.